Hello and welcome to the Mind Your Career webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rammelfinger and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Mind Your P's and Q's, 10 principles and 3 questions to guide your career. Today's speaker is Deborah Mills Schofield, who is a parent of a U Chicago college student, her greatest claim to fame on this webinar, but she's also a career coach, an author, and a visiting scholar at Brown University. When Deb was an undergrad, her advisors told her that she could not graduate in 3 years from Brown, and she proved them wrong by doing it. By the age of 20, she had received her degree and finished her program. It's my pleasure to hand the controls over to Deb, this high achiever who has much to teach us today.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and good afternoon or morning, depending where you're calling in from. So I have been doing mentoring, ad hoc, whatever, for many, many years, predominantly at Brown, which is my alma mater, and with a few of my son's friends. He is class of 19 at U Chicago and a soccer player, so it's the subset of soccer kids. And there's some learnings I've gathered over this time, also from my consulting practice in strategy and innovation with clients who need a lot of the same views as they look at their careers. So, Rachel, if you would go ahead with question 1, that would be fabulous. What I want to talk to you about, and again, this is not cast in stone, but it's based on the experience of my mentoring, watching others, and the fact that our world has changed dramatically from, the days you'd graduate from school and go work for one company for the next 30 years of your life. And we used to start out where that's what we would do. We'd go to school, you'd have a degree in something, and then you would go do that. For instance, for me, I was one of a few who started the cognitive science concentration at Brown. We weren't all sure what you did with that, but it was really cool to study how the brain processed information. And from there, I went to Bell Labs. And Rachel, if you could do the second question, that would be great. So I would go to Bell Labs. I went to Bell Labs and thought, well, I'm just going to be there for the rest of my life. That's where I'm going to work. And part of that was because you could do so many different things at Bell Labs, but not always. So in the old days, your first job out of college, like I said, was probably the one you retired from. Maybe you took another one. But in general, it was a fairly linear path. And we were, and I'll explain this to you later, we were like normal lobsters, just, normal routine people. But times have changed, and they changed earlier than a lot of us would admit. And your first job after college is not necessarily and rarely the job you're going to retire from. And I would say that over the course of your life, you're going to have many different jobs, careers. You could change industries. I mean, you don't know where things are going to go. It's no longer a linear path, and you can be going in any direction. And moving up the ladder is not necessarily a measure of success. Sometimes changing ladders is, or going from rung to rung on a different one. And so I look at the way we do things today as kind of blue lobsters. So to me, a blue lobster is a person, and if they're enough, an organization that challenges the status quo, views the world differently, wants to have an impact, and wants to keep learning. They are actual real things. There really are blue lobsters. They're about 1 in 2 million. And where I live in Maine, at the peninsula southwest of us, is the University of Maine's Research Center. And they take the blue lobsters and literally dump them in our harbor. So we tend to have a higher than normal percentage of blue lobsters, probably 1 or 2 a year, actually. And they are stunningly gorgeous. That's a photograph of a real one. And you get enough of these folks together that want to challenge and look at the world differently and have an impact, and you have a Blue Lobster organization. But in general, blue lobsters do not follow any linear path. They're kind of going from experience to experience and figuring out what it is they want to do. So I've kind of come across 10 career principles. Again, everybody will have their own view, but these are the ones that I have found most effective and very true. First of all, very little that we do is truly irrevocable, except bluntly die, and that doesn't get undone, most of us. And as I look at people in their career, they're always worried about, well, if I do this, then I've shut these other doors, then I won't be able to do the next thing. There's a focus on closing opportunities instead of opening them up. And most people today have tremendously fabulous options. So when you close a door, you still may have 4 doors that are incredible to go through. The other thing that really hit me is a while ago, I forget how long ago, 60 Minutes had an episode about a kid that was in Cirque du Soleil. He'd been in a motorcycle accident, lost his leg, obviously then couldn't perform, but was given a prosthetic leg, and with much therapy and training and all that, he was back performing in Cirque du Soleil. So honestly, if we really think about it, very little of what we do is truly irrevocable. My concentration is not my destiny. There is such a view, well, I was an engineer, or I was poli-sci, or I was econ, or I was in finance, or I was whatever, and that's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And that is so not the case. So I look at myself. Right after Brown, with a cog-sci degree, which is on how does the brain process information, so how do we design things for people to absorb information better, I went into a division in Bell Labs that was looking at human factors like stuff. So I used it for a little bit. But then that quickly morphed into, I saw another interesting project, so I moved on to that, and I kept moving around. But foundationally, what my degree taught me, and I would submit what our degrees teach us, is how to think, how to ask great questions, and how to figure out answers. And we learned that in the context of whatever it was we studied at school, be it finance, econ, biochem, whatever. So while your concentration isn't destiny, that doesn't mean that what you've learned, and most importantly, how you've learned it, isn't applicable to the rest of your life. I know I found for me and several of my students that it's that process of learning and critical thinking that you use forever. The other one is, it is perfectly okay not to know, and it is okay to change. And I see this with a lot of my clients. You know, it's viewed that the senior leadership, the C-suite, if you will, is supposed to have all the answers. And part of what that means is then when you don't have the answers, you're concerned about going to that person and admitting you don't. Part of the role of leadership is saying, I don't know, will you help me find out? The other thing is there's so much to know that there's just no way to know everything. And by admitting that you don't know, you open yourself to so many more possibilities of ways to learn, gather information, and discover what that is. And you may find out that's cool, but I really don't want to do that. So again, it is so okay not to know, as long as you want to find out, you start figuring out how, and to change direction. So can you do the next question, please, Rachel? Thank you. So along those lines, I'm guessing that the 3 things that were most important to you when you graduated are not necessarily the most important or in the same order as they are today. I think for all of us, what's important while we're in college or while we're in grad school or right after all vary as we continue through life and our jobs. So it's really important to realize that is not what is core. What is core is who you are and what you will or won't stand for. But it is okay to have those things that change be most important. A lot of times I see, relationships were really important in college. You're not going out to a new job or changing jobs and you don't know anybody. So finding new people to hang out with and talk to might be a lot more important than it was right after school, or it might be more important than it was in your first or second time. So I can see from the results all of these exactly, and it varies by point of time. Next, let's face it, guys. 10-year plans are so 20th century. One of my students a few years ago came to me in her senior year, first semester, with her 10-year plan, and she was having a lot of trouble constructing this. What is she going to do over the next 10 years and get to wherever? And kindly, I hope, I laughed and said, look, put that in a drawer and let's talk about the next 2 to 3 years. Because of the rapid change in our environment, it is virtually impossible these days to have a 10-year career plan, because you could be doing something that doesn't even exist yet, as most of us probably will be. Which gets me to the 6th principle: who I am is what I believe in. And I think you can fairly early on in life set what you will and won't stand for, kind of a set of your core values. And those may change a little bit, but at the core, they should be core. So what I believe in and what I will stand for is kind of the guiding principles of how I will choose careers, locations, friends, etc. And that is something that I think you can develop and you can be sure in. It's interesting, one of my students this last week said to me, he was questioning about our personal narratives. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, when you're at a party or you're somewhere and someone says, you know, how are you? Or you go to introduce yourself, we all start with what we do. So, you know, I'm a strategist, or I'm a partner in a VC firm, or I'm a student. We don't start with who we really are. We define ourselves by our jobs and our careers. And I think that's normal, but I also think it's dangerous. And maybe it's time to start changing that, because that isn't just who we are. We are a lot more than that. The other thing is that concept of there is a path. There is a path, and there is another path, and another, and another. So realizing that there are many ways we can grow in many careers and many options right out of school and even onward can be very freeing. It can also be overwhelming because you think, oh, now I got to pick one, or there are too many options. But it's important to realize, again, back to nothing is irrevocable, that there are multiple paths for us to take, and each of them are good and okay paths. So my grandmother, who died at 99 and a half, used to always say in her broken Eastern European English that the day you die, the day you stop learning is the day you die. I've kind of taken a variation on a theme, and I think it's important to view life as a set of experiments where we learn, we apply those, and we iterate forever. And think of your career that way, as constantly trying things. And you may try something for 10 years, that's okay. But trying things, learn from them, apply what you've learned so that it's of value, and try something else again, or try a variation on a theme. It's kind of the startup methodology applied to us as people. The other thing, and man, oh man, this is really, really hard, is to know what you can and cannot control and then accept that. Now, it's also easy to intellectually acknowledge what we can and can't control, but not emotionally or psychologically. And that, if we can get to that point, for most of us, that would just be a huge bonus. But that's important to look at in terms of your career, so you know what you are in charge of versus what others are and aren't in charge of. And lastly, let's face it, there are always trade-offs and compromises. When the whole early-ish Me Too stuff started, but the whole women career with Anne-Marie Slaughter's cover on The Atlantic in, I'm going to say 2014, but it could have been longer than that. You know, this whole concept of, we said, well, you can have it all. Well, no, you can't have it all. Or no, you can't have it all right now. No matter what in our lives, we cannot have it all, nor can we have it all at the same time. And so no matter what we do, there are always trade-offs and compromises to varying degrees and at varying stages. But that's got to be another thing you ponder in your career path or paths, as nonlinear as they will be, of what are you willing to compromise on and what aren't you? And that a trade-off now doesn't mean you're stuck with that same trade-off forever. So with that in mind, I want to get to my 3 key questions that I tend to ask all my students, and as they're looking at their careers, and my clients as they're thinking of their career trajectory within their firm or even leaving it. And there's our blue lobster. So think of these in terms of you as someone that wants to just challenge and do things differently. So there's the, okay, what am I good or great at doing and I actually like or love to do? And these can be professional things, personal things, social things, a variety of things. But write those down, or if you do mind mapping, map those out and take a look at what those are. Because these are things you want to try to do in your career. Then look at, okay, what am I good or great at doing, but I don't love or like to do? So for instance, I am good at going through spreadsheets and analyzing pro formas and all that kind of stuff from my business background and also as a venture capital partner. I hate doing that stuff. I'm more interested in playing around with the variables and the assumptions rather than going over all the data in and of itself. So I try not to do as much of that. I have other people that do that, and I get to look at the stuff I like. And lastly, what do I want to learn, explore, discover, or experience over the next 2 to 3 years? So I've come to the viewpoint that no, we can't do a 10-year plan anymore. You can kind of do 5-ish, but more realistically, look at the world and your career in 2 to 3 year chunks. And I'm seeing that a lot with my own students and with my clients, where after about 2 to 3 years, it's kind of time for the next thing. And so I think especially number 3, question 3, is something you should always be doing in your life. What are the things I'd like to learn? I'd like to explore. I'd like to discover. The experiences I'd like to have over the next 2 to 3 years. Prioritize those. And then for the top ones, how could I go about making that happen? Now, as we get on in our careers in our life, there are different constraints than when you're fresh out of school or grad school or early on in your career. For instance, when my kids were in elementary school or middle school, I couldn't just say, well, see you all later. I want to go explore falconry in Mongolia. Well, I could, but I wouldn't, nor should I. So sometimes there are constraints, and there should be constraints in context. That's part of the compromise and trade-offs. So given where you are, how can you go about learning or doing the things you'd like to do? And ideally, how can that inform the type of role you should have, the type of company, the type of organization, and for what time, and the kind of people you want to work with? So again, you're not going to be able to get what you want in each of these, but the goal is to kind of maximize the what you're good and great at doing that you love to do, minimize the good or great but you don't like to do, and really the new stuff is in number 3. There's another kind of motto I've developed over the last few years, which is that you don't want to get out of your comfort zone. You want to expand your comfort zone, which gets to a lot of 3 to push yourself. Because if you get out of your comfort zone to do something, and then you've done it, and you enjoy it, and you're fairly good at it, it's now part of your comfort zone. So keep pushing the boundaries out of your comfort zone. And if you're not comfortable with that, just push it out a little. It doesn't need to be some major leap. So the way I describe this to my students, and let me just say, playing is really important. Legos are, and I don't own any stock, I have no whatever to Lego. They are just like the best things in the entire world. And so you're never too old to play with Lego. So please get yourself some Lego if you don't already have some. And think of your life as a set of Lego, just random Lego, no kit. So if you think about that, some of your bricks are connected, are hooked together, and you can't unhook them. For instance, you can't change who your parents are. You can't change your genetic makeup. You can't change where you grew up or where you went to school. But if you start taking a pile of bricks and connecting those together, you're going to see that there are still a ton of loose bricks. And these are bricks you can configure and reconfigure over and over for the rest of your life. So think about that. How do I want to have my bricks built for the next 2 months, the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What bricks do I want to have that I don't have? How could I get them? Maybe I have bricks I don't want. I could swap for them. Maybe I have bricks I just don't want and I can get rid of them. But very little of you is actually fixed. There's so much that you can use to configure, reconfigure, and play around with. And what I actually do with my students, and now I'm doing it with my clients, is whenever I've got office hours, which I hold up at Brown every month, I have a container full of Lego, and we actually get the Lego out and start playing with that. The other important application you can use with Lego, it's not as much fun, but, and I do this a lot with clients, is you've got your set. Now, if you want to do something new or add to it, we do only have 24 hours in a day. Maybe you can add more bricks and it's not really going to affect you. But most likely adding bricks means you've got to take some away. And so as you think of doing something else, think of what aren't I going to do? And what aren't I going to do in a joyful sense of I don't have to do that anymore, or I've learned I can put that aside. So as you're adding bricks, make sure you take something away, a brick of equal or greater size if you want to leave some wiggle room. But I really encourage you to think that way, that your life is a set of Legos, very few of which are put together, and you can create multiple paths over the course of your life, and dramatically different paths. So that, one of my students made a Blue Lobster Lego for me. You can start realizing your own Blue Lobster and create your own trajectory. And that basically is how I view your career path, my career path, all our career paths, as a continual evolution of how you keep growing, trying different things, being open-minded, and realizing that the risk of not trying is sometimes as big, if not bigger, than the risk of settling for the status quo. So that's my lesson, verbiage, whatever for today about life being a set of Legos, finding your Blue Lobster. The career trajectories are just so incredibly different than they ever used to be. And a lot of times I find you're fighting societal pressures, sometimes parental, depending where you are in your career path, and expectations. Well, I'm supposed to do this. Well, why? Maybe it's a self-imposed supposed to. Maybe it's external. But think through those so that you leave yourself open for more experiences to develop yourself and to have an impact on others. Do you guys have any questions?
As folks are writing in their questions, I thought I could share the poll answers for the first two questions that you asked, Deb.
Please. Okay, so a lot of you most of you have been in your job, really most of you for less than 3 years, less than 18 months, less than 3 years, more than 3, but less than 8. It's interesting. I tend to see a real shift around 18 to 27 months is when the 31% of you are trying to figure out, this isn't what I thought, or what's next, etc. And that's a great time for starting to think through those 3 questions and where could I maybe go to try this? Actually, you can do it at any time, but that's a pretty typical time for that to happen in normal, and it's an important time to kind of assess that. And what were the responses to the next poll? Cool. So this is more than, so you guys have been doing a lot of things. So you've been trying different things. I wonder how many of you have stayed within, I should have asked this, but I didn't, within the same industry, or you've really dramatically changed what you do. That would be also another interesting thing. And I'd love to hear what your experiences have been and how easy or difficult it's been changing your careers or changing your jobs.
So please, as you're able, you can write some of those comments into the question box. I know it's not a question, but then we can share that with Deb and have a conversation. One question that has already come in is, how do you handle people that are uncomfortable when you begin to change their bricks? Do we inform? So let's say if I'm working with someone else, do I inform them or just let it happen?
So no, you just take all their bricks away and give them a whole new pile and say, tough luck. No, I'm just kidding. I think one of the ways, if someone's not comfortable changing their bricks, then a way to go about that is, let's change some small bricks. You know, like Legos has those. Let me see if there are any in my Lego pile. There are, okay, I don't know if you can see at the bottom, there's this, you know, it's just a 2 for, even here's a 1 for, a 1 by 1. So change something small. And I think it's also important to help them, if you're managing them and leading them, understand how this benefits them. Because most of the time we see change as threatening. And so if you can look at it as, I know this is going to be hard, but let's start with very small steps. Small steps are really important, guys. You don't need to like change the world overnight. But we're going to start this small step, see how it goes, get some feedback. Then maybe next time we can go to a 2 by 1 brick. And keep letting them know how this is for them, not just for you or for the organization. How is this helping them grow and be better as a human being? And it might be something that applies to other areas of their life as well, rather than just work.
And we've had some comments in about your question, Deb, about people changing jobs. We had one person who said, I went from social work to economics over time, and combining them was not always obvious for others, but I've always been clear and I've had to learn how to market myself that way.
That is so cool and so important. So I've given this a talk before called Life by Design, which I'm now changing to Finding Your Blue Lobster, about, you know, guys, basically, if I can understand how all my pieces fit together, that's fine. And if you can't, well, good for you. But you're right. It does mean you have to market yourself better. And it also raises the, to a degree, linear nature of most of the thinking today, because I could already start seeing how social work and econ could go together and finance. I mean, but it might not be obvious. So learning how to really draw those linkages is very useful. And I think it also helps you, and tell me if the person that asked that, did learning how to market yourself help you even further think through that evolution?
And we'll give our commenter Roxanne a moment to type in an answer. She said yes. That's her answer. Yes.
So the other day, I was sitting down with a kid who thinks she's a first semester freshman. She thinks she wants to do urban planning. She's very interested in cog-sci, and she didn't just say that because it was me. And she's very interested in criminal justice. And she said, you know, I love all these things, but I don't know how they tie together. So I said, well, why don't you think about doing an independent concentration? Because if you take urban planning, and I said, if you're interested in this, but urban planning and also the lack of urban planning has a dramatic effect that where you live tremendously impacts your view of the world, your view of life, your view of what can and can't be. So if you're living on the south side or west side of Chicago and in a dilapidated area, and that's all you're seeing, and you see crime and you see boarded up windows and you don't have a lot of trees or green space, that's going to impact what you think is possible. We also know that trauma early in childhood does actually rewire the brain, which maybe can be unwired that way, but it takes a lot of time. And so then if you want to bring in criminal justice, a whole study of what does that urban landscape look like? How do the perceptual changes in your environment affect what you judge as right and wrong, how you get involved with certain people, et cetera, and lead you either into, out of, or never getting into the criminal justice program. And in fact, I told the kid about Jens Ludwig's crime lab on campus. So again, there's a way, like, to me, it's like, duh, these things fit together well. But sometimes you have to explain that. And so I think what you did with the social worker in econ is absolutely fabulous. And we need more of that interdisciplinary stuff.
We've had a couple other people also sharing about their changes. We have one person who said they've changed industries 5 times and functions 2 times. Someone else said that they've found it impossible to make the change. They've been looking for the last 2 years and they're just receiving static back from their search.
You know, it could depend. I can't answer that. It could depend on the industry that they're coming from and that they want to go to, or the role. Some industries are more stuck in the 20th century than others. So, you know, I would just advise to keep thinking of different angles for that, and other past people have gotten to there.
A question I have is, do you have any specific advice for women who are seen as maybe overqualified for a job? Example, a woman with a PhD in her early 50s with lots of diverse experience, but was once even a professor. This can be seen as intimidating, and or also put someone into a box. What advice might you have?
So I probably have to be polite on this call, on this webinar. It still amazes me how intimidating strong women can be in this era. And I do think, you know, we do get put in boxes given what we've done. So without knowing you specifically, I would say if you show, can demonstrate, and by that I mean either graphically show or discuss or tell the various things that you've done. And frankly, and I know this isn't an easy answer, but if you're intimidating them, you don't want to work with them anyway. And I know that's a flippant, easy comment to say, but you're only going to flourish if you're in the right area. And I would say maybe there's certain industries that are better able to handle that than others. I know that's not a great answer, but, you know, if I knew more, I could tell you more. But it's just, it amazes me, seriously.
And people can please keep sending in your personal experiences. I want to jump to a couple questions that were about your presentation, Deb. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this difference between getting out of your comfort zone and expanding your comfort zone?
Okay, so to some degree, it is semantics, but let me try and think of an example for me. So to me, getting out of your comfort zone is doing something totally different than you've done. So for me, it might be, trying to think of an example. So I've been much more interested in how the brain processes language, and not as much as how do we process visual cues. And so to me, something that would, I'll use the term change my comfort zone right now, would be going back and really studying, conducting some experiments on differences between visual perception for different types of people or different types of visual perception, especially for me right now between virtual reality and regular reality. I'm not sure how comfortable I'd be doing that because, you know, it's going to change a lot of my perceptions and whatever, and I do have the time, and it's a whole different set of tools and software than I've used before. But if I did that and started doing more of that, I would probably become comfortable with it, or comfortable enough that I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. Once that happens, it's part of my comfort zone. So for instance, I used to do a lot of programming. I haven't done anything in ages, and I started to try to teach myself Python. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I just don't get this. It's different from what I learned. I don't really want to do that. But I kept pushing myself. And I also had my students pushing me because they were writing stuff in Python they wanted me to look at. And I'd say Python's now not the strongest part of my comfort zone, but I'm comfortable enough in it. So that's what I mean by expanding. Think of it as a circle, and so I'm going to get bigger to learn X, and as I learn X and get comfortable, now my whole pie is bigger, or my circle. And then as I learn Y, my circle gets bigger. And I also think it's a mental shift from getting out of to be like, oh my gosh, I'm stepping off the shore into the water, versus expanding is like, oh, I'm just putting a foot in the sand. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that was wonderful. We have a couple other questions about the principles that you suggested. Someone wanted, and maybe we could even go back in the PowerPoint. They wanted to go back to the 10 principles, specifically the fourth principle, which says that the 3 most important things to me right now will most likely change over my life. And they want some clarity about what you meant by that.
So I look at, I'll pick students soon to graduate or early in your first job. Things that are important are like, to a lot, rightly or wrongly, the right job, the societal view. Your parents can be proud that they paid for this big IB plus education because Chicago's part of the plus, and now you're on Wall Street. So it's important to me to look like I'm doing something significant with my degree. It's important to me to have the right friends, and right can be however you determine that. And it's important to me to be making a lot of money to pay off my student loans, or just to make a lot of money because that's another sign of prestige. Whereas down the road, the 3 most important things could be being a great spouse or parent, having a job that maybe you don't care so much what society thinks, but it's really a joy to you, and it's changing people's lives or having some kind of impact that's positive. And you want to be around a close set of friends who may not always think like you, so you can keep learning, but respect you. There's mutual respect and admiration and an open-mindedness. So like for me, right out of Brown, it was working at Bell Labs was really chic and impressive. Getting a patent was really important to me, and I did. Going into New York City, because I was in New Jersey, doing all the New York City things, those were all really important to me. And I'd grown up with a lot of the New York City, so hey. Whereas if I look now, what's really important to me is being the spouse and the parent that I want to be, being for my clients what they need to help them grow and succeed, and being the mentor and advisee that my students need. And those are all 3 very different things than when I was 20, right out of college at Bell Labs. And I don't mean that there was something wrong with any of those. It's just different stages of life. Different things are important.
Mm-hmm. If we could go, another question was about the 3 questions that you're asking, specifically about question 3.
Mm-hmm.
I know what I want to learn, explore, and discover, but current constraints, especially financial, make taking the next step to explore, discover, and learn about those things difficult. Do you have any advice on how I might proceed?
So I would look at what those are, and are there ways you can start learning about them or doing something about them without having to spend, in this case, money or a lot of money. And since I don't know what those are, I'm just going to throw these out. There's all these courses on Lynda, there's Khan Academy, there's Coursera. There are people, you can do informational interviews with people that have done these things. And again, it's not for a job, it's really to learn and get their experience and see. Maybe you can volunteer if you have the time in something related to it. Those are just some suggestions. until you are at a point that you could actually take the time and the money to do that. So if you can't, there's still got to be things you could do now, not again, ideally what you want. So that's the trade-offs and compromises, which makes total sense. And almost everybody, when they are looking at what do they want to learn, explore, discover, they have financial constraints, other responsibilities. So what are some little things you could do now to start down that path of learning? And that could include what can you plan to do, save up to do, or whatever, that then you could go learn and maybe like moving somewhere or travel experience or whatever. So it's not ideal, but it might get you started that way.
Someone else said that they've been warned that the first job you get can permanently fix your career path and typecast you in your profession. How do you overcome this force? It seems like a privilege few professions have that provide flexibility, while there are other professions that have less flexibility.
So first of all, who told you that? So I mean, that is a belief. I have yet to actually ever see that that is the case, that the first job after college is your destiny, except for folks that may have wanted it to be or aren't willing to take some of the risks to have it not be. But in all honesty, I think your first job out of school, in an ideal world, if you can stay there about 2 years, that's great. I've had kids stay less for a variety of reasons. It wasn't a healthy or a safe environment. One of my students, for instance, aerospace engineer, went to work for Boeing. She thought it was her dream job. She gets there, realizes you have to be a union member as an engineer, which I didn't know. I thought that was weird. And now you're part of a union, so you only work 7.5 hours a day. You do what you're told. You don't go above and beyond. You don't challenge. You don't do any of that stuff, which is how she normally does things. And she was miserable. And so a bunch of us all said, look, kiddo, look for something else. And she said, I can't. I've only been there 6 months. Well, she finally did. She's in a job she absolutely loves. And what she discovered was nobody was surprised that she was leaving. None of her team at Boeing was shocked that she wanted out because most of them did. And that was 6 months, which I normally wouldn't advise. And she left there on good terms because no one was surprised, which raises a bigger issue of shouldn't Boeing be wondering why people don't like this job. But again, I just wholly disagree with that. And surround yourself with people who can support you in making a change. And you're not committing for life. You're committing for like 2 years of life.
You know, there are a couple other people, Deb, who are responding, well, they feel like this has happened to them too, that they feel a little stuck and stained by that first job. What advice would you have of how might we surround ourselves with the right people to help make that change? Or what things might we do if we're feeling stuck?
One of the things to start doing is talk to people that you know, and maybe that's your immediate circle, the next circle, and the alumni community at Chicago, and that have changed careers or changed jobs after the beginning. And how did they do it? And why did they do it? And what was the process they went through to get there? I would then also talk to folks that are doing jobs or have careers similar to what you would like to do and talk to them again. You know, what were the steps you took? What worked? What didn't work? What would you advise? What would you say don't do? And gather data that way to see how could you start moving yourself into something different. And I would also look at, is it a case that it's really the company, or is it your immediate management that's the problem? And do you have then maybe other mentors, or you could get other mentors outside of your area within the company? And then also, to be really blunt, is it somewhat you too? Because a lot of times we're our own worst enemies. So it's usually a combination of those. And if it is your organization and your management, is there somewhere you could go somewhere else in the organization? Or again, through these informational discussions, interviews, whatever you want to call them, you'll have with people, start creating a path for getting out of that.
Another question I had was, how do you find confidence in changes when you're marketing yourselves to others?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard to do. One of the ways I used to do that when I didn't have the confidence was I would be really good at promoting a colleague, a friend, whatever, and just being their advocate and boasting about them and you should hire them, etc. Or I could do that for a product or service I was developing, but I couldn't do that for me. And I got over that by trying to think of myself as a product or service and how would I sell me? So try to get me out of the equation in that sense. If Deb is a Blue Lobster, how am I going to best position and market Deb so people will want to buy this Blue Lobster? And it might be that you need a friend or a colleague to help you start doing that. But if you think you have stuff to give, you need to do that. I had another case where a client of mine asked me how I was marketing myself. And I was like, nobody goes to Google and searches strategic planning. Well, some do, but no CEO does that. They ask other people, who do you know that does strategic planning? And so I said, I kind of try this and that. And he said, you should ask every one of your clients for 5 referrals. And he said, because it is not right for you to hide your talents and gifts when it's so needed. And that really helped me change my thinking to, this isn't just about a living for me. I really am positively impacting people and companies. And I need to let people know that I'm a resource that's out there. So looking at all the cool things you have indeed done, which to you might seem normal and typical, but may not be to most of the rest of the world, and starting to package yourself up that way. And also there might be people that are willing to promote you, to market you for you too.
We have someone else who says they're a Generation Xer, and they've moved around a lot, had a lot of new career tracks, and visited and lived in a lot of different countries. However, when interviewing, I get a lot of pushback from the interviewers, particularly from boomers, who are quite critical of this. What are your thoughts on the best way to respond?
Tell them too bad they didn't have the guts to do it. No, I'm sorry. I think, it is a different generation, and boomers really do have trouble with this because it's not how things ought to be or way things were. They might be worried about your loyalty and your stick-to-itiveness. I think if it's an organization you really want to work for, then show them how all of these have helped you learn and develop and what more you can bring to the table. That I don't know what the longest time is you've been somewhere, but that, if you are somewhere where you're satisfied and you feel like you're making an impact, you're more than glad to stay there. But this is how all this has developed me into me and what I can offer for you now. I would also say, take a look at organizations that aren't being led by boomers or are being led by more open-minded boomers. So they're not going to look at you and think, oh, what the heck has this person been doing? But think, oh my gosh, look at all the cool things this person's learned and the way they've been able to relate them to each other.
We have someone else who's struggling. They were a teacher for 6 years and they've been interviewing for jobs in real estate and other industries. And they're ready to leave teaching, but at many of the interviewers bring up, oh, but you're such a good teacher, or it's a good and honest profession. Why would you want to leave teaching? And they really focus a lot on the why, that question of why do I want to leave? So what advice do you have for this specific person, but for all people, if when you're interviewing, and you want to make a change to a new career, and there's really a big focus on, well, why are you leaving that other profession? How might folks answer that question?
Well, first of all, you need to understand why you are leaving that profession. And, maybe it's because you've done that, you've had wonderful experience, but you feel that it is time for you to move on to something else. And I think that's a way you can say it without negating the experience you've had, that you just want to do something different. You've done that. It's been worthwhile. You've learned this, 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 and this. And I feel it's now time for me to be doing the next thing because I want to learn these things, which I feel I can learn in real estate or in whatever. And then also, as best you can, maybe shift the conversation. You can also ask them, what were they doing before they did what they're doing now? And why did they change? And kind of put it back on them and have them reflect on their own, which then can raise a level of understanding. Maybe.
I have someone else who shared their story is that they specialized in architecture and fine arts, and
Yeah.
then later moved into the humanities, and has been dabbling in photography and being an editor, but sometimes has felt lost because there are so many things to do in the humanities, and would like some advice on how do you stay grounded and confident in your professional identity when you have so many interests and keep changing.
Oh my gosh, that's so common to what I see with my students all the time. Very much of how I am too. I think one of the ways to do that is you kind of have your core within art, architecture, form, substance, visualization of ideas and of pure art as well as functional. And as you're interested in other things, I think you can certainly explore those and look at them as perhaps additive. So, um, you know, and I don't know if this is the right example for you, but there's architecture, and I'm going to go back to urban planning just because I've been swamped with that in questions all last week during office hours. There's then architecture in the bigger context. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do you build something so that it can also create a sense of community? So for instance, one of my clients, bakerripley.org, down in Houston, designed a community center with a school and all sorts of stuff. And their architectural design of that building, the use of the architectural elements as well as color, um, sociology, ethnography, all sorts of different humanity tools, social sciences, help them construct a building that looks like several buildings, but really is one continuous building, even though you don't realize it, just because of how they changed windows, colors, sizes, shapes of roof lines, etc., and created this gorgeous little village, but it's structurally one building. So that brought in not just the visual arts per se, but social science in terms of targeting to the market they were working with and what looked like home for most of them. It was 50% Hispanic from Central America. So what might villages look like? From ethnography studies of real bottoms-up research of users' needs and wants, pains and gains. Some cognitive science stuff of how do you process and look at information and how does that inform you of the world. So it was very multidisciplinary. And I think that's a way to do it. At the core, you're still interested in the visual representation per se, but all these other aspects help make that more impactful and maybe more specific for a targeted community. I don't know if that helps.
Someone else said that they were looking for any comments or recommendations using your model for someone that has been at the CLevel Executive for 25 plus years, but just doesn't want to do that type of work anymore.
Then you know what? Don't. Depending on your situation, financial and other obligations, what freedoms do you have to try something different? And I'd go back to that, to question 3. What do you want to learn, explore, discover, experience? And then what are some ways you could start doing that? There's several things. Since I mostly deal with the C-suite, my clients, there is your practical knowledge of having run something that is so very useful to startups, mid-size ups, for lack of a better word. Maybe you could do some teaching at the university level. I don't know what else you're interested in, but the hardest thing I think at that level to change is you're used to a certain routine, you're used to the predictability, and you're not used to having a lot of freedom. And you're also not used to having someone you can really confide in. So it takes a while to get used to that, and maybe you kind of ease into it. But in most cases at that level, it's a big leap. And I'll also tell you, from a succession standpoint, it's really important if you're ready to do that, to have something you can go that you really want to do so that you can leave and not be a presence still hanging over the organization.
Deb, I have one final question for you. In one sentence, can you share with us a key takeaway you want us to leave your presentation with? The one sentence, what's the key thought from today?
That nothing you do is irrevocable and there are many paths.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody who turned out and joined us. Thank you all for a lively discussion. Thank you, Deb, for helping us so individually answer our questions about our own career paths and our specific situations. And I want to invite everyone who's on to join us again. In November, we have Career Month, and we're going to have a sneak peek, which actually will connect to what we talked about. We talked a lot about marketing ourselves and branding ourselves today. On October 31st, we are having a webinar on just that, stand out and level up in the workplace. But during the month of November, we will have 15 online events. So please check out our long list, almost something every work day of the month. So check it out, see what interests you, and join us again for more tips, tools, trends to help turbocharge your career. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Are we done?